My name is Ava Morrison. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, I believed betrayal would feel like something dramatic.
Loud, explosive, impossible to misunderstand.
I thought if the man I loved ever crossed a line that mattered, there would be something undeniable attached to it. Lipstick on a collar, a message left open, a mistake so obvious it couldn't be explained away.
But the truth is, the worst betrayals don't arrive like disasters. They arrive like ordinary days. A quiet evening,
A half-empty glass on the table, a conversation that sounds almost casual until it isn't.
that was how my life ended. Not with screaming, not with tears, with a sentence. And a silence that followed me for years. Thursday had started like any other. Long, exhausting, predictable.
I had spent 10 hours managing a construction project that was already 2 weeks behind schedule, juggling contractors, budgets, and deadlines that never seemed to care how human I was. By the time I got home, the sun had already dipped low, painting the sky in that dull orange that always made everything feel slower than it was.
My house was quiet. Too quiet. That should have been my first warning.
But I didn't notice it then.
Because when you trust people, you don't look for cracks.
I built my life carefully.
Deliberately.
I was the kind of woman who planned things, structured things, fixed things.
At 26, I bought my house. At 29, I was making six figures.
At 32, I married Daniel Carter after 6 years together.
We weren't perfect, but we were stable, or at least, I believe we were.
Then there was my younger sister, Jenna Morrison,
3 years younger.
and somehow always 3 steps behind in responsibility.
She was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous, careless.
The kind of person who treated consequences like suggestions.
But she was also the favorite, always had been. Where I got expectations, she got forgiveness. Where I got pressure, she got second chances. And I got used to cleaning up after her. So when she showed up at my door one Tuesday night with 2 overstuffed trash bags and that familiar, rehearsed expression, I already knew what she was going to ask. "Just a couple weeks, Ava," she said, "until I get back on my feet." I hadn't even opened my mouth yet. Daniel answered first. "Of course she can stay," he said easily. "She's family." Family. That word used to mean something. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 2. 2 became 4.
And somewhere in between my 60-hour work weeks and late-night project calls,
My sister stopped being a guest and started becoming part of the house. She was always there, on the couch,
in the kitchen,
laughing with Daniel, drinking my wine, wearing my clothes without asking. Small things, harmless things, things I didn't question. Because why would I? She was my sister. He was my husband. We had been trying for a baby for almost a year, tracking everything, timing everything.
watching months pass with nothing but disappointment.
So when Daniel told me we should just relax about it, I tried. I really did.
Then one afternoon,
It finally happened. 2 pink lines.
I stared at them for a long time before it even felt real.
Then I laughed. Actually laughed.
The kind that comes from relief more than joy.
I called Daniel first, then my parents, then my friends. I posted it. I planned it.
I started looking at cribs during lunch breaks.
Picked color palettes. Made spreadsheets. For 3 days, I lived inside that happiness. 3 days. That's how long it lasted.
When I got home that evening, they were both sitting in the living room.
Waiting.
That was the second warning.
I ignored that one too.
"Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "What's going on?"
Jenna wouldn't look at me.
Daniel looked like he hadn't slept. There was something in the air.
Something heavy. Something already broken. "We need to talk," Daniel said. And something in my chest tightened. Just slightly. Not enough to understand, but enough to feel.
"About what?" I asked.
Still calm. Still unaware. Still standing on the edge of something I couldn't see yet. Jenna inhaled sharply.
Then, "The baby," she said.
And stopped. Long pause. Too long.
I frowned slightly.
What about it?
Another silence. Then Daniel spoke.
And everything changed. It's not yours. I blinked.
Once.
Then I laughed.
A short, confused sound.
What are you talking about?
Jenna finally looked at me. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "It's his," she whispered.
The room tilted. Just for a second.
3 seconds, maybe. Long enough for everything to break. Then everything went perfectly clear.
How long? I asked.
My voice didn't sound like mine.
It sounded calm. Detached.
Like I was asking about the weather.
2 months, Daniel said.
Still not meeting my eyes.
2 months. In my house. In my bed.
While I worked. While I trusted them.
While I built a life for all of us.
I nodded slowly,
letting the math settle.
letting the betrayal take shape.
"You've been sleeping with my sister," I said quietly.
"For 2 months."
"It just happened," Jenna said quickly, reaching toward me. I stepped back before she could touch me.
"Nothing just happens for 60 days, I said.
60 days is a series of choices. Daniel finally spoke again. We didn't mean for this, but we fell in love, Jenna interrupted, as if that made it better, as if that explained anything. I stared at her, really stared, and in that moment, I didn't recognize her anymore. Love, I repeated softly. You fell in love with my husband in my house. We tried to stop, she said. Tears falling now. Real tears. Useless tears. I looked between them, then nodded once. Okay, I said. They both blinked. Confused. Relieved. Hopeful. Okay, Daniel repeated. I grabbed my keys from the table. My wallet. My phone. You have 1 hour, I said. What? Jenna whispered. To pack your things and get out of my house. Ava, wait, Daniel started. 1 hour, I repeated. After that, I call the police. This is my home too, he said. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt nothing. Not anymore. Then I walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't yell. Didn't cry. I just left. And that was the last moment I ever spoke to either of them, like they still mattered. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a hotel room, staring at a blank wall, trying to understand how everything I thought was solid had collapsed in 3 sentences. My husband, my sister, 2 months, a baby that was never mine. And somewhere in that silence, something inside me didn't break. It changed, quietly, completely. That was the night I stopped being part of that family. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had slept well. I hadn't. I drifted in and out of something that barely qualified as sleep. The kind where your body shuts down for an hour at a time, but your mind never really lets go. Every time I opened my eyes, I had the same disorienting half-second of peace before reality came crashing back in. Daniel, Jenna, the baby, the confession. Then the peace vanished, and all that remained was clarity. Not grief. Not yet. Clarity. I sat up slowly on the hotel bed and stared at my phone on the nightstand. It was face down, silent, harmless looking. But I already knew what was waiting for me on the other side of that screen. Panic, excuses, pleading, maybe anger once they realized silence was the only thing I planned to give them. I picked it up anyway. 43 missed calls, 78 text messages, most from Daniel, a handful from Jenna, several from my mother, 2 from my father, 1 from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 8 months, which told me everything I needed to know about how fast betrayal traveled when it had the scent of scandal attached to it. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I set the phone down, stood, walked to the tiny coffee machine near the dresser, and made the worst cup of hotel coffee I'd ever tasted. Then I called the best divorce attorney in the city. A receptionist answered first, crisp and efficient. I need the soonest available appointment, I said. What is the nature of the matter? Adultery, I said. My husband got my younger sister pregnant while she was living in my house. There was a pause, a beat of professional silence. Then her voice became even sharper, more focused. I can fit you in at 9:30 with Ms. Brenner. I'll be there. That was call number 1. Call number 2 was to an emergency locksmith. I need every lock changed today, I said. Front door, back door, garage, everything. Today might be difficult. I'll pay triple. He stopped talking for a second. Then, what address? I gave it to him. That was call number 2. Call number 3 was to my boss. I kept it simple. Family emergency. Need a couple of weeks away from the office. I can answer only what's essential. He didn't pry. That was one of the reasons I respected him. Take the time, he said. We'll cover for you. That was call number 3. Then came the one I should have known would hurt almost as much as the original betrayal. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, warm, still full of the joy she'd been carrying for 3 days. Honey, I was just thinking about you. Your father and I were looking at bassinets last night and... Mom, I said. Something in my tone must have cut through her excitement, because she stopped. What's wrong? I looked out the hotel window at the parking lot below. A man loading luggage into the trunk of a silver sedan. A little girl in pink shoes hopping around the cart return. The ordinary world, continuing like mine, hadn't just been split open. Daniel got Jenna pregnant, I said. They've been sleeping together for 2 months, in my house. Silence. Not shocked silence. Processing silence. Then quietly, are you sure? That question. That one question. It landed harder than anything else had so far. I shut my eyes. He admitted it, I said. In my living room, last night. They both admitted it. Another pause. I could hear her breathing. Could almost picture her pressing her fingers to her forehead the way she always did when she wanted to make herself the center of a crisis she hadn't suffered. Well, she said finally, I think we need to hear Jenna's side before anybody makes permanent decisions. I didn't respond. She mistook my silence for softness. Honey, relationships are complicated. I let out one breath through my nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, something emptier. Complicated, I repeated. People make mistakes when emotions get involved, she continued, gentler now, like I was the unreasonable one she needed to guide back towards civility. And Jenna has always been vulnerable, you know that. There it was. Of course there it was. Jenna, fragile. Jenna, lost. Jenna, hurting. Jenna, somehow again the victim in a story where she had walked into my house and helped herself to my marriage. What about me? I asked. My mother hesitated just long enough to answer without words. I'm just saying we should all talk before you do anything extreme. Extreme. Like changing locks on the house I paid for. Like divorcing the man who got my sister pregnant. Like refusing to smile through humiliation just because everyone else preferred comfort over truth. I opened my eyes. Thank you, I said calmly. For what? For making this easy. Then I hung up. I stared at the screen for a long moment after the call ended. I should have been devastated. I should have been shattered all over again. Instead, I felt something colder. Cleaner. Recognition. She had chosen. Maybe not in her mind. People like my mother never thought of themselves as choosing sides. They thought of themselves as keeping the peace, which usually meant sacrificing the person who demanded accountability in favor of the person who made life louder. But a choice had still been made, and now I could make mine. At 9:30, I sat across from Rebecca Brenner in an office that smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive paper. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, immaculate, and had the kind of face that suggested she had no patience for emotional theatrics unless they were strategically useful in court. She listened while I explained everything. Didn't interrupt. Didn't flinch. Just took notes. When I finished, she closed the file in front of her and said, "Do you want a clean break, or do you want to make this hurt?" The question should have startled me. Instead, I appreciated it. Clean break, I said. Fast, thorough. No room for him to come back and negotiate. She nodded once. Good. That's the smarter choice. Adultery matters here, especially with documentation. Do you have any proof? I have them both admitting it verbally. Text records may exist on our shared phone account. He's been living in my house. She's been living in my house. The pregnancy timeline will speak for itself. Her eyes sharpened. That'll do. She spent the next 30 minutes outlining the process. Filing, temporary protections, asset separation, strategy. She spoke in clean lines and legal inevitabilities, and with every sentence, I felt more stable. This was something I understood. Paperwork, deadlines, outcomes, not emotions, not family, not all the messy things people use to excuse betrayal. By the time I left her office, Daniel was no longer my husband in my head. He was an opposing party. And Jenna was no longer my sister. She was collateral damage I was done carrying. When I returned to the house that afternoon, the locksmith was already there. His van sat in the driveway like a promise. Inside, the house felt wrong. Not haunted. Contaminated. Like the walls themselves had heard things they should never have had to hear. Daniel's car was gone. Jenna's too. Good. I let the locksmith in and walked through each room while he worked. The guest room was a disaster. Closet open. Drawers half emptied. A water glass on the nightstand. A hoodie Jenna had borrowed from me months ago, tossed onto the floor like the room still belonged to her. My kitchen looked raided. Several groceries gone. A few bottles missing. Even one of my expensive chef's knives was nowhere to be found. The bedroom was worse. Nothing dramatic. That would have almost been easier. Just absence. 2 pillows indented. A blanket twisted at the foot of the bed. Evidence that life had gone on here while I was out working myself into exhaustion, thinking I was building something for the future. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I walked to the linen closet, pulled out trash bags, and started stripping every sheet in the house. My bed. The guest bed. The throw blankets from the couch. Anything they had touched. Anything that felt like it belonged to a version of my life that was now dead. By the time the locksmith finished, I had a heap of fabric in the garage and 3 new keys in my hand. I paid him in cash, locked the door behind him, then stood alone in the center of my living room. My living room, my house, my furniture. And for the first time since the confession, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a few tears sliding down my face while I stared at the couch where they had sat together and told me my life was disposable. When it was over, I wiped my face, took a shower so hot it turned my skin pink, and went to bed in clean sheets. I slept alone, and somehow that felt safer than anything had in months. The next morning, my phone exploded all over again. Messages from unknown numbers now. Extended family. Daniel's parents. 2 cousins. My Aunt Marlene, who hadn't called me on my birthday in 3 years, but suddenly had deep opinions on forgiveness. Still, I didn't read them. I sat at my kitchen island with a notebook and started making a list. People who needed my new number. My lawyer, my boss, my 2 closest friends, Rachel and Nina. My bank, my therapist's office. That was it. Everyone else could disappear. I called my phone carrier before I could talk myself out of it. I need to change my number today. May I ask why? Harassment. The woman on the line paused only briefly. We can have the new number active within 2 hours. Do it. I spent the next hour blocking everyone on my old phone. My mother, my father, Jenna, Daniel, Aunt Marlene, Uncle Scott, my grandmother, 3 cousins, his mother, his father, every person who thought they had a right to immediate access to me after what had been done in my own home. By the end of it, my contact list looked gutted. Good. That was the point. Around noon, Daniel emailed me. He must have realized his number was blocked. The subject line read, "Please don't do this." I opened it only because I wanted proof of what desperation looked like when it finally met consequences. Ava, I know you hate me right now. I know I deserve that, but please don't shut me out like this. We need to talk like adults. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jenna and I didn't plan it. We were trying to figure out how to tell you in the least painful way possible. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. I still care about you. I always will. Please answer. Please. I read it once, then forwarded it to Rebecca. For documentation, I wrote. That was all. No reply. No anger. No performance. Just documentation. By day 3, my mother showed up at my office. Reception called first. "There's a woman here asking for you," the receptionist said carefully. "She says she's your mother." I stared at the spreadsheet on my computer screen without seeing any of it. What does she want? She says it's urgent. Of course she did. People like her always called their own panic urgent. Tell her to leave. There was a small pause. She's crying. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. The old version of me would have gone downstairs. Would have worried about appearances. Would have thought about how humiliating it might be for her to be turned away. The new version of me had started forming the second Daniel said, "It's his." And that version was not interested in protecting the dignity of people who had not protected mine. "Tell her to leave," I repeated. "And if she refuses, call security." Another pause. Then, "Understood." 10 minutes later, I stood by the 3rd-floor window and watched security escort her to the parking lot. She stood there for a while beside her car, one hand over her mouth, head turning toward the building like she could somehow stare me into becoming obedient again. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not guilt. Just distance. That evening, my father came to the house. He knocked for 20 straight minutes. Hard. Steady. The kind of knocking men use when they believe persistence is the same thing as authority. I sat in the living room with the television on low and listened without moving. Eventually, he called through the door. "Ava, open up." I didn't. "We need to handle this as a family." Still nothing. "Your mother is beside herself." I almost laughed at that. Then came the line I should have expected. "Jenna feels terrible." There it was again. Jenna's feelings. Always Jenna's feelings. Never mine. He knocked again. Louder. "Don't throw away your whole family over one mistake." I stood then, walked to the front door, not to open it, just close enough to speak through it. "One mistake?" I asked. The knocking stopped. I could picture him on the other side, shoulders straightening, surprised to hear my voice. "Ava, thank God, open the door." No. A beat of silence. Then, "Honey, let's just talk. You're defending my sister for sleeping with my husband and getting pregnant in my house." "Nobody's defending anything. You called it a mistake." "It was a terrible mistake." I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, my voice was flat. "If you come back here again, I'll call the police." "Ava, you chose Jenna. Live with that choice." Then I turned and walked away from the door. A few seconds later, the porch fell silent. I watched his headlights disappear through the curtains without going outside. The divorce papers were filed that Friday. Daniel contested the house at first. That part almost amused me. He wanted partial equity. Claimed marriage entitled him to more than I was offering. Rebecca handled it in under an hour. She presented the adultery timeline, financial records, proof that I had purchased the property before marriage, and enough supporting documentation to make his position collapse under its own arrogance. He signed 2 days later. Jenna tried contacting me from a number I didn't recognize the following week. Voicemail. I listened only once. "Ava, please," she said, already crying. "I know you hate me. I know I ruined everything, but you're still my sister." That sentence almost made me physically ill. Still my sister. As if biology were some magic shield against consequence. As if blood excused character. As if years of taking from me gave her lifelong access to my forgiveness. She kept talking. Said she loved him. Said she hadn't meant for it to happen. Said she missed me. I deleted the voicemail halfway through. Not because it hurt, because it insulted me. By week 4, Daniel came to the house while I was at work and left a handwritten letter under the doormat. I found it that night. 4 pages. I read every word once, standing in my kitchen. He blamed loneliness, my long work hours, emotional distance, confusion, temptation, the way Jenna had understood him, the way things had crossed lines unexpectedly. Unexpectedly. As though a man could accidentally betray his wife over and over again for 2 months and still think the word unexpected sounded honest. I took the pages to the sink, tore them in half, then in half again, dropped them into the trash, didn't even grant them the dignity of fire. At the end of the 2nd month, my entire extended family gathered without me. I found out because one of my cousins accidentally copied my old email on a message chain. Subject line, family meeting regarding Ava. I opened it. Read every word. They had discussed me like I was a problem to solve. My anger, my instability, my refusal to move forward. One aunt wrote that grief sometimes manifests as cruelty. My uncle said I was punishing everyone for a private marital issue. My grandmother, in a message that made my jaw tighten, wrote that family cannot survive if every mistake becomes exile. Not one of them asked what Daniel and Jenna had destroyed. Not one of them called the affair abuse of trust. Not one of them said my name with compassion instead of annoyance. They were inconvenienced by my boundaries. That was all. I forwarded the thread to Rebecca with a single message. I want formal no-contact orders, against all of them. She called me within 15 minutes. That's a serious escalation. So was a family tribunal deciding I'm the problem. She was quiet for a moment. Then, are you sure? I looked around my kitchen, at the clean counters, the quiet house, the absence of chaos, the first real peace I'd felt in years. Yes, I said, I'm sure. By the following week, the paperwork was in motion. And just like that, silence stopped being a reaction. It became a structure, a wall, a weapon, a life. Because that was the truth no one in my family understood. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was trying to survive them. And for the first time in my life, I was doing it without apology. By the time the restraining orders were approved, something inside me had settled into a rhythm I didn't recognize, but trusted. Everything was quieter, cleaner, predictable in a way my life had never been before. No unexpected calls, no emotional ambushes, no one showing up uninvited, demanding explanations for things they had already decided weren't valid. Just silence. And for the first time, silence felt like safety. I sold the house 3 months later, not because I had to. Financially, I was more than stable. The house had been mine long before Daniel, and legally, it remained mine after him. But every room carried ghosts, not memories. Evidence. The couch where they sat when they told me. The kitchen where I had celebrated a pregnancy that was never mine. The bedroom that had become something I refused to name. I listed it on a Thursday. Accepted a cash offer 2 weeks later. Below market value. I didn't negotiate. Peace was worth more than profit. The new place was across the city. Modern. Minimal. No history. No emotional residue baked into the walls. Just space. And that was all I needed. 6 weeks after the sale, my company called me into a meeting. My director sat across from me, fingers laced together, expression carefully neutral. We're restructuring leadership across regions, he said. There's an opening for a senior director position. It would mean relocation. Different state. Bigger portfolio. More responsibility. I didn't ask for details. Didn't ask for time. Didn't ask for anything. I'll take it. He blinked. Most people usually want a few days to think. I don't. A pause. Then a slow nod. All right, we'll start the transfer process. 2 weeks later, I packed my life into boxes again. This time it felt different. Not like loss, like movement. Forward. The new city was 8 hours away. Far enough that no one would accidentally run into me. Far enough that my past couldn't reach me without effort. And I had already made sure effort wouldn't be enough. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my parents. Not Jenna. Not Daniel. Not extended family. The only people who knew were my lawyer, my employer, and 2 friends who had never once tried to convince me I was overreacting. That was all the circle I needed. The first year was steady. Work consumed most of my time. Long days. New teams. Bigger responsibilities. I was good at it. Better than good. By the end of 6 months, I had already been moved into a higher leadership bracket. By the end of the year, I had bought another house. Cash. No mortgage. No shared ownership. No one else's name tied to anything I had built. Everything was mine. I started dating slowly, carefully. Not because I was afraid of men, but because I was no longer willing to ignore what I saw. The first few dates were forgettable. Polite conversations. Surface-level questions. Men who were nice enough, but not enough. Then I met Ethan Brooks. It was at a company networking event. One of those forced social setups where strangers are paired together and expected to pretend it's organic. He stood across from me with a drink in his hand and a slightly amused expression. "So," he said, "what do you do when you're not being held hostage by corporate networking?" I raised an eyebrow. "Manage multi-million-dollar construction projects." He nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, so this is actually a step down in intensity for you." That made me laugh. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. We talked for 2 hours. About work. About cities. About how exhausting it was to pretend small talk mattered. There were no games. No performative charm. Just ease. We got coffee the next day. Then dinner a few days later. By the third date, I was waiting for the shift. The moment where something felt off. The moment where I would have to start ignoring small things to preserve something bigger. It never came. 3 weeks in, he asked the question most people eventually ask. "So, family?" Simple. Casual. Normal. I didn't hesitate. "No," I said. "I don't have any." It wasn't technically true, but it was accurate. He studied me for a second. Not suspicious. Not probing. Just aware. Then he nodded. "Okay." And changed the subject. Just like that. No follow-up questions. No pressure. No attempt to understand something I hadn't offered to explain. That was the moment I noticed the difference. He respected boundaries he couldn't see. Without being asked. We kept seeing each other. Once a week. Then twice. Then it stopped feeling like scheduling and started feeling like routine. 6 months in, I told him everything. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just one evening, sitting on my couch, the words came out in a steady line. My sister. My husband. The affair. The pregnancy. The family choosing her. The silence. The restraining orders. The relocation. All of it. He didn't interrupt. Didn't react in exaggerated ways. Didn't try to soften it. He just listened. When I finished, the room was quiet. I waited. For judgment. For advice. For the inevitable suggestion that maybe, just maybe, I had gone too far. Instead, he said, "That's brutal." That was it. No lecture. No moral positioning. Just acknowledgement. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he added. Not, "You should forgive them." Not, "Family is complicated." Not, "People make mistakes." Just that. I exhaled slowly. Didn't realize I'd been holding tension until it left. "Want to know something?" he said after a moment. I looked at him. "My ex cheated on me with my best friend," he said. "I cut both of them off. Haven't spoken to either in 3 years." I blinked. "You don't regret it?" "No. Simple. Certain. Final." "They made choices," he continued. "I made mine. That's how it works." Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically. Not like breaking. Like settling into place. For the first time since everything had happened, I felt understood without being analyzed. We moved in together a year later. It was his idea. "I'm tired of pretending we don't already live in the same place," he said. I considered it for exactly 1 day. Then said yes. Life became steady again. But different. Better. Not because it was perfect. Because it was honest. He didn't need to know everything about my past to respect it. He didn't try to fix things that weren't his to fix. He didn't question boundaries he hadn't lived through. He just stood next to me. Consistently. 2 years after I moved to that city, he proposed. No spectacle. No audience. Just us in the kitchen one night. "I don't want to build a life with anyone else," he said. "So let's not overcomplicate it." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married at City Hall. 2 friends as witnesses. No family. No expectations. No history attached to it. Afterward, we went to dinner. Shared a bottle of wine. Talked about work. About nothing. About everything. Then went home and watched a movie like it was any other night. And somehow, that was perfect. A few days later, his parents called. They had seen a photo one of our friends posted. "We're happy for you," his mother said. "But why weren't we invited?" I tensed slightly. Old habits. Old expectations. Ethan answered before I could. "We wanted it small," he said. "Just us." A pause. Then his father said, "We understand. Congratulations." That was it. No guilt. No pressure. No emotional manipulation. They took us out to dinner that weekend. Celebrated. Asked questions. Listened. Respected every answer we gave. I watched them interact with him. With me. And for the first time, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Family didn't have to feel like obligation. It could feel like choice. That realization stayed with me longer than anything else. Because it made one thing painfully clear. what I had walked away from, was never what I thought it was. And what I had now was something I had built from nothing. 3 years into my new life, I stopped thinking about Jenna every day, then every week, then only when something reminded me. Until one afternoon, when my past tried to find me again, my lawyer called. Her voice was calm, but there was something under it. "Ava," she said, "your sister contacted my office." I went still. "How?" "She sent a letter, requested that I pass it along to you." I looked out the window, at the quiet street, at the life I had built that existed entirely separate from hers. What does she want? A pause. Then, "She says she's in therapy, that she's changed, that Daniel left her, that she needs family." I closed my eyes. "Not in pain, in clarity." "Tell her no," I said. "She mentioned the child," my lawyer added carefully, "said there are medical concerns. She's asking for family medical history." "Those records are accessible through legal channels," I replied. "She doesn't need me." Another pause. "You're sure?" I opened my eyes, and everything in my life, my home, my husband, my peace, stood quietly behind me like proof. "Yes," I said. "Completely." That night, Ethan asked me about the call. "What did you say?" "No." He nodded. "Good." "She said the child is sick," I added. He didn't flinch. "Then she should handle that like an adult." I looked at him. Really looked. No hesitation. No pressure. No guilt. Just support. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. I hadn't just escaped my past. I had outgrown it. The 4th year in my new life began quietly. No warning. No shift in routine. Just another morning that looked like every other morning. Coffee brewing, sunlight filtering through clean windows, Ethan reading emails across from me at the kitchen island. Peace had become so normal, I no longer noticed it. Until something from the past tried to interrupt it again. It didn't come as a call, or a message, or a dramatic confrontation. It came as a coincidence. Someone at work leaned against my office doorway that afternoon, holding her phone loosely in one hand. "Hey," she said casually, "this might be random, but your last name is Morrison, right?" I didn't look up immediately. "Yeah, I saw an obituary this morning," she continued. "Same last name. Thought I'd ask if there was any connection." My fingers paused on the keyboard, just for a second, then kept moving. "No," I said, "common name." She nodded. "Yeah, figured. Just thought I'd check." She walked away. And just like that, the information existed, and I chose not to touch it. An hour later, my lawyer called. That's how I knew. "Ava," she said gently, "your father contacted my office." "Of course he did." "He said your mother passed away, heart attack, 3 days ago." Silence settled into the room. Not heavy, not suffocating, just present. "He says her last wish was to see you," she continued. "The funeral is in 2 days. He's asking if you'll attend." I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, let the words settle into place where they belonged. I waited for something. Grief, regret, guilt, anything. Nothing came. "No," I said. My lawyer didn't respond immediately. "She spent her last years trying to reach you," she said carefully, "according to him." I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I thought about my mother. Not the version who had raised me. The version who had answered the phone that morning in the hotel. The version who had said, "We need to hear Jenna's side." "She spent her last years defending my sister," I said quietly. A pause. Then my lawyer sighed softly. "I'll let him know. I didn't attend the funeral. Didn't send flowers. Didn't write a message. Didn't acknowledge it at all." A week later, an old college acquaintance messaged me. Someone who still lived in my hometown. Someone who hadn't realized I had erased that entire part of my life. "Hey, I heard about your mom. I went to the funeral. Just thought you should know. Your dad wasn't doing well. Your sister gave a speech. Talked about forgiveness. About family. About how your mom died heartbroken because you cut everyone off." I read the message once, then locked my phone. They needed a villain, and I wasn't there to defend myself. So they built one. That was fine, because I knew the truth. And more importantly, I had stopped needing anyone else to. A few months later, my father tried again. Not directly. Through my workplace. HR called me into a meeting. "There's a man claiming to be your father," they said carefully. "He's asking us to arrange a meeting. He mentioned your mother's passing, said it was her last wish for reconciliation." I didn't react. Didn't shift in my chair. Didn't let anything show. "He has a restraining order against him," I said. Their expressions changed immediately. "We'll handle it," they said. "He is not to contact me again," I added. "Or this company. Please document that." Of course. That was the last time my father tried anything official. The unofficial attempts didn't stop. Voicemails left with my lawyer. Messages sent through unfamiliar channels. Fragments of regret wrapped in entitlement. I never listened to them. Around that same time, something else happened. Ethan and I weren't trying for a child, but we weren't preventing it either. We were just living. So when the test came back positive, it didn't feel like shock. It felt like timing. We told his parents first. They cried. Actually cried. Happy tears. Started talking about baby names within minutes. His mother offered to help design the nursery. His father started researching strollers like it was a full-time job. There was no tension, no hesitation, no politics, just joy. We told our friends next. They celebrated, showed up, brought food, laughed. No one questioned if we were ready. No one turned it into something complicated. Because healthy love doesn't look for cracks. It supports what exists. Our daughter was born in September. Healthy. Perfect. 8 pounds of quiet, steady breathing and tiny hands that curled instinctively around my finger. We named her Lily Brooks, after Ethan's grandmother. I held her in the hospital room, staring down at a life that had nothing to do with anything I had left behind. No betrayal, no dysfunction, no confusion, just choice. I had built this from nothing, from ashes, from silence. 4 months later, my past found me again. This time it wasn't subtle. Security called my office. "There's a woman here asking for you," they said. "She claims she's your sister." I didn't move, didn't even look up from my screen. "She's not allowed to be here," I said. "She's insisting." "Call the police." A pause. Then, understood. I kept working, didn't go down, didn't look out the window, didn't give her the satisfaction of even a glance. The police arrived. She was arrested for violating the restraining order. I found out the details later through my lawyer. She had cried, begged, said she just wanted 5 minutes, just wanted to talk, just wanted her sister back. 5 minutes. After everything. After 2 months of betrayal. After years of being chosen over me. After an entire family trying to force me back into a role I had finally escaped. 5 minutes. The judge extended the restraining order. Added penalties. Made it clear there would be consequences for the next violation. That night, an email slipped through. New address. Unknown sender. Subject line. "Please read this." I should have deleted it. I almost did. But something, curiosity, closure, something quiet and distant, made me open it. It was from Jenna. She wrote about everything. How Daniel had left her. How raising the child alone had broken her. How our parents blamed her for everything after I disappeared. How our mother had died angry. How our father barely spoke to her anymore. How she had lost her job, her apartment, her sense of direction. She wrote about therapy, about regret, about waking up every day wishing she could undo it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Not directly. She just wrote, "I destroyed you for something that didn't even last. And now I'm living in what's left of that choice. I don't expect you to answer. I just needed you to know. I'm sorry." I read it once, then again, then closed my laptop. Ethan was in the living room, holding Lily, gently rocking her. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. That was my life. Not the email, not the past, not the apology. This. I walked back into the kitchen, opened my laptop, forwarded the email to my lawyer. Violation of restraining order. Proceed accordingly. I didn't respond. Didn't hesitate. Didn't second guess. Because forgiveness was never the point. Peace was. And I had it. 5 years later, I am 38 years old. I have a husband who respects me. A daughter who will never grow up wondering if love comes with betrayal attached to it. A home that belongs entirely to the life I chose. Somewhere, my father lives alone. My sister moves through the consequences of her choices. My ex-husband exists in a version of life that no longer intersects with mine. They wanted me to forgive, to forget, to prioritize their comfort over my pain. I chose something else. I chose myself. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. Silence isn't cruelty. Silence is survival. Sometimes the only way to heal is to remove the infection completely. Even when the infection shares your blood. They made their choices. I made mine, and I never looked back.